Colorado's treasurer keeps track of the state's investments, has a voice in the state pension system, and runs the unclaimed property program. And while the treasurer doesn't set tax policy, the treasurer does have a prominent voice on issues like the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Democratic Treasurer Dave Young is finishing his first term in office and is challenged by Republican former state legislator Lang Sias from Jefferson County. They debate tonight on Next Presents The Race for Treasurer. Thank you for joining us. Kyle Clark alongside Marshall Zellinger. Treasurer Dave Young and Lang Sias, thank you for being willing to come in and talk about your views and differences of opinion with the voters of Colorado. A note for folks at home, with the exception of that introduction and the conclusion of our debates, we do not refer to candidates during the debate using elected or educational titles, because you as voters will determine on Election Day who is going to hold the title treasurer.
Candidates, you've agreed in advance to a few ground rules. We'll have 45 seconds to answer our questions, continued discussion at our discretion, 1-minute closing statements, and a chance to ask each other questions as we respectfully explore where you stand on issues and agree and disagree.
Lots of people are talking about the topic of inflation, so let's start there.
Mr. Sias, the first priority on your website is to fight inflation. The state treasurer manages money. How does the state treasurer fight inflation?
Well, the state treasurer, first of all, I'm running to be a champion for our taxpayers because the cost of living in Colorado has gone up so much. Now, what I can do as the treasurer and ways in which I will do things differently than the current treasurer, first of all, I'll manage the treasurer's office in an efficient manner. The current treasurer has increased the size of the manning there by almost 50% in 3 years. I think we can do better. Second of all, I'll serve as a strong and independent voice in our public pension system, which, as you know, is a serious liability for our state. And third of all, I will use the bully pulpit of this office to argue for cost-benefit analysis of the legislation that we pass, because the regulations we're passing have driven up costs on Colorado taxpayers. Second, for looking at how we spend our money and the results that we get. And third, to stand up for our right to vote on tax increases and tax refunds.
I need to ask about the first point you made there. Did you say the manpower in his office? That
yes.
He has increased employees in his office, and that has led to statewide inflation.
What that does is any time that the state is reaching further into hardworking taxpayers' wallets and family budgets to increase the size of the government, that's taking money out of their pockets, and it's driving up the cost of living in our state.
Thank you, Mr. Sias. Mr. Young, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, Denver's metro area inflation is now 7.7%. This time last year, 4.5%. Why shouldn't that be a reflection of your work as state treasurer?
Well, prices are going up everywhere. This is a global situation. We've seen the pandemic and the economic downturn, supply chain issues. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay attention to it. Certainly during the economic downturn, I started a Climber small business loan program to address the needs of small businesses here in the state of Colorado. My belief is that when businesses are competitive, then they can actually drive down price. It is a market force, and small businesses are overrepresented in our economy. So this attention to small businesses is important.
I want to ask, because Mr. Sias brought it up, because you hired more people in your office, did that cause a higher inflation rate?
No, it didn't. What had happened is we have a great staff. We actually have a great staff in the Treasury, but they were pretty heavily under-resourced and overworked when I got in there from the previous treasurer, Walker Stapleton. For example, we only had 3 investment officers for $20 billion and needed to really make sure, because the number one job of the treasurer is to make sure the taxpayer dollars are safe. We've added some programs from the legislature that have added staff. This is by legislative edict, so we respond to that when we were asked to increase staff.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Sias, I saw you raise your finger.
Well, Colorado leads the nation in rate of inflation. Every Colorado family is now paying over $950 more every single month than they were at the beginning of last year, just to try and keep up. And that has all happened under single-party rule in this state.
If I understood that right, we're at 7.7%, and nationwide we're at 7.9%. So how does Colorado rank number one in the nation?
If you look back to January of 2021, Coloradans, the dollar cost of inflation, it's up at over 15% since that time. And Coloradans are paying more cumulatively for transportation, energy, food, and housing That is number one in the nation.
So 15%. I'm looking at a 7.7% rate from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Where is this 15%?
That is coming from the Joint Economic Committee of the United States Senate, and I will be happy to give you the numbers.
So if you were state treasurer, would you be using numbers from a partisan source to make decisions versus what we're seeing from U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and from nonpartisan legislative council staff?
Those statistics don't disagree, and as I said, those are generated by the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Senate. And Colorado is number one. And what we need to do in this state is take a look at how much money we're taking from our taxpayers and how much money we're spending. Our state budget, as I think you all are aware, has gone up by over 25%. I believe it's 28% exactly in the last 4 years. We've had over 1,000 new employees that we've hired statewide, and it's been widely reported that we are on an unsustainable path with creating 12 new offices in our departments. I'll let you go ahead and finish, but there has just been tremendous growth of government with no check and balance.
One final word on this topic, Mr. Young.
Well, you know, it's controversial, but in fact, we actually did issue TABOR refunds to every taxpayer here in the state of Colorado. I know that there was some criticism on that, but we understood that prices were going up, and so we returned that money earlier to taxpayers than would have been under Republican rule. You know, most of the people have already received that $750 checks, 1,500 joint filer. We moved it also in a way that actually benefited more people. The current tax refund mechanism that my opponent likes benefits the very wealthy, and average taxpayers don't get that much. So we've made some efforts to try to deal with inflation that way. I will say his numbers are creative on the budget. I want to remind you that in 2020 there was a 22% cut in the general fund. I don't know what he's talking about for numbers, if he's talking about total budget. I was a member of the Joint Budget Committee. I know the budget numbers pretty well.
Thank you, Mr. Young. And that's a topic, Tabor, we'll get to in momentarily.
I'm sure we will.
First, let's talk about the Great Colorado Payback. There was an audit that started before you took office, Mr. Young, that found some major problems with the unclaimed property program. The audit found that the state had failed to properly notify 1.5 million people of unclaimed property. It was taking years to pay out claims. So you got that audit in July of 2019, and then you announced reforms to the program in November of 2021. Why did it take more than 2 years to announce those reforms? And can Coloradans be assured that the program is operating well now?
It's a great question. And actually, there was a 13,000 claim backlog when I took office. And shortly thereafter, we actually cleared that. So we were actually doing a variety of things, implementing a variety of things. The program under the previous treasurer had been very paper-based. We moved to a technology solution, and it took some time to implement that, but we have returned large amounts of unclaimed property to people. As a matter of fact, last year, I was the president of the unclaimed property programs around the world. So I've actually been picking up additional ideas from my friends in other states and other countries that are implementing this as well. But I think we're on a great sustainable pathway, and this is people's money. They want to get this back, and at a time where prices are going up, being able to retrieve that property, usually money, is really important.
Despite all of the state investments and so forth, I feel like if there's one thing people know about the Treasurer's Office is it gives people their unclaimed property back. So, Mr. Sias, I'd ask you, would you make any specific changes to the way that program is being run? Or does your opponent deserve credit for implementing the audit findings and cleaning it up?
Well, what I do know is that I was talking to an attorney a few weeks ago who came up to me and represented a local government, and she was complaining about the fact that the process of recovering for that local government, even a small sum of money, was very cumbersome and frustrating for her. So whatever is going on, there is clearly still some frustration out there. Now, to the extent, because I've read that audit and read the responses, and to the extent that the folks at the Treasury Department have followed that roadmap, that's a good thing. What I will do is use the process management experience that I have acquired in the military and in the private sector and take a good look at that program. And if I think there's a way that we can make it better, I will.
Thank you.
Tabor, here we go. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights, Tabor. Constitutional limit on how much the state can keep and spend in the part of the law that requires a vote of the people for any tax increase. So let's get the simple question out of the way. Mr. Sias, if you had your choice, without Tabor's requirements, should Coloradans always have a vote on tax increases?
Yes, they should.
Okay.
And on the refunds.
Mr. Young, should tax increases always be put to a vote regardless of Tabor?
Yes.
Okay, now let's get into the weeds. Mr. Young, your first year as treasurer in 2019, you encouraged voters to pass Proposition CC to let the state keep all future Tabor refunds, including the ones we just partially got. Voters rejected that. This year, in response to the Tabor refunds getting sent to us earlier than normal, you have repeatedly said, quote, "This is a crucial time for us to get tax refunds back to taxpayers." Besides being politically advantageous in an election year, what got you to be pro-Tabor in 3 years?
Well, we know that the prices are going up, and so we wanted to be sure that people had that money in their pockets so that they could actually, and for people in moderate to low income family situations, you know, they're struggling with rent, they're struggling with food, medicine, transportation, and the like. So, you know, we knew that it was important to get this back to people. I will remind you that CC was exactly what I just said. We put it in front of the voters, and they decided that they didn't want to support that. However, I will remind you it was for education funding and for transportation funding. And so I always talk about the outcomes of Tabor. And we've been watching Tabor now for 30 years. We have the lowest competitive salaries for teachers. You can't spend any time on the roads without seeing what the problems are. And I point back to Tabor as the problem that's causing that.
But if that's your position, shouldn't you be saying, I don't want to be giving you this $750, $1,500 check. I don't want to be giving it back to you.
No, not in a situation where we know the economy is turned. I think we should always look at the situations and make sure that we are addressing people's needs. But certainly education is a need, transportation is a need. I have a sister who's intellectually and developmentally disabled who was homeless for a year. And this I really attribute directly to Tabor. We've got people who are vulnerable and at risk, and we can't meet life-saving kinds of supports for them as a result of Tabor.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Sias, if you had your choice with Tabor, with the refunds, would you like to see them continue to be equitably distributed like they were this year, regardless of your income level, or do you want them to still increase as your income level increases?
My preference is that they reflect the taxes that people pay, but I frankly don't have much of an objection to the way they were distributed. My objection to this is, first of all, that my opponent is running ads trying to get people to vote for him on the basis of giving them money that, in fact, they were A, going to get anyway, and B, that he tried to prevent from ever happening. I also have a very different view about how the government should be able to reach into our family budgets and take money without our permission. I think getting that permission is important, and I do have a follow-up on his comment regarding education funding.
Just real quickly, if Tabor refunds continue to exist, should they be sent out early like they were this year?
I have no problem with them being sent out early.
Okay. Tell me what your issue is with the education.
Well, you know, I've been looking for a long time, serving on the Education Committee, at where the money goes. And a recent nonpartisan study just came out that confirmed that over the last 14 years, our per pupil spending on K through 12 education statewide, it varies by district, of course, has gone up by 45%. But teacher pay has only gone up by 27%. And during that period, we've been hiring district level administrators at almost 4 times the rate that we're hiring teachers. And of course, our student outcomes, as I'm sure you're well aware, are not good. Only 40% of our third graders are reading and doing math at grade level. So my point is, it is important that we judge ourselves not just on how much money we spend, but on how that money gets spent. And I want to see it go into the classroom and go into our hardworking teachers and to bring up those performance scores.
I don't want to drag this conversation out too long.
Sure.
But teacher salaries are dictated by local school districts, not by the state treasurer.
This is true. However, when I was in the legislature, and I've been working on this for 5 years, and we did a study of this 4 years ago that showed the same thing. And what I want to do is provide some transparency to our parents and to our legislators on what's happening with the money, to see if we can't get more pressure applied to see that the money actually goes to the classrooms and the teachers, to teaching the kids so that they can raise those scores. Because I think it is a very, very serious issue.
We'll make it quick, and we always have that room for a question later on.
Absolutely. So, you know, I was a teacher for 35 years. I spent 25 of that in the K-12 classroom, also taught at CU Denver. I know education policy well. And I think we're throwing around a lot of numbers here, but at the end of the day, I know the fact is that our school systems are stretched thin. 80% of their budget is people, and when you have the lowest competitive salaries in the country, then you have a problem with attracting and retaining the top professionals that we need to have in front of our students. There was legislation passed in 2010 that actually caused the increase in administrators through teacher evaluation. It's very controversial, and so I think it's easy to point to how we measure by standardized tests, but if you want to ask an expert who really knows about measuring student performance, I can tell you that because I am one.
Perhaps we can get back to this when you ask each other
I've got kids in the public schools right now.
So actually, because you're both passionate about this issue of education, I want to ask you about another school-related issue. But just to be clear, the nonpartisan study you're talking about, that was the Common Sense Institute study, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. They're nonpartisan, so they can keep their tax status. But that's a conservative think tank that you were citing.
They are, but I haven't heard anyone disagree or dispute their numbers. And I did a separate study of this using publicly available data, actually reported to our Department of Education by the districts, and we came up with very, very similar results 4 years ago, and actually showed how teacher salaries could go up if the administrator headcount went down.
I just want folks to know where the numbers are coming from.
Absolutely.
So not within the direct purview of the treasurer, but obviously an issue that you guys both care about a lot. You've even got it on your website in terms of how you're going to continue to advocate for robust school choice for Colorado families. Republican gubernatorial candidate Heidi Ganahl is proposing school vouchers that will allow families to use taxpayer dollars for private or religious schools. Would you advocate for taxpayer money to go to private religious schools?
My focus has always been on school choice within the public school system. I'm not familiar with her proposal, so I'll stick with what I have focused on. But it has been for a very robust school choice within the public school system.
Ganahl's idea aside, the idea of taxpayer money for private and religious schools?
You know, I think when we are looking at districts where we have horrible performance and kids don't have another choice, then I think we need to investigate all possibilities. But as I say, my focus has always been within the public school system.
Mr. Young, you were a school teacher in Greeley. You talked about this. Should the state treasurer even be weighing in on the issue of school choice? Clearly, you guys are passionate about this, but where do you come down on this voucher idea as well? It involves taxpayer money, it involves the state, and you guys are talking about. What do you think about the idea of private money or taxpayer money for private schools, religious schools?
Not in favor of it at all. But I know that a lot of people want to have school choice. I actually helped start a charter school in Greeley, so it's not something that's theoretic for me. I actually understand very deeply how to run a school and stand one up. So, you know, and charter schools are public schools, and I think people sometimes forget that. But
that is true.
This issue around adequate funding is a major, major issue for our state. The children are our lifeblood of the future, and if we underfund education, we sell our state short. So I will always advocate for better funding of our public schools and our educators that are serving in those roles.
Thank you both for a robust discussion on education.
Sure.
Mr. Young, earlier this year, PARA, the pension fund for public employees, divested $8 million in Russian-owned assets because of federal sanctions against that country. Now, Russia isn't the only bad actor on the world scene. Would you support PARA divesting from, say, Saudi Arabian assets based on that country's human rights abuses and manipulation of world oil markets?
Well, the first vote I took as a member of the PARA board, now I've been a member of the PARA board for 4 years now as state treasurer. The first vote I took was actually on a divestment policy. And the divestment policy, which I supported, was that it is the legislature's job to actually set that policy. So if they actually decide to divest, and we saw presidential and congressional action on the Russian-owned businesses, as well as the governor here in the state of Colorado acting. So this is a wider conversation that we have our elected officials engage in. So, you know, whatever the legislature or the governor or whatever entity that's empowered to make a divestment decision comes up with, then we'll honor that.
So if there is a bad actor out there, we're okay with our money there as long as the state legislature says it's okay?
Well, let's have a conversation about what the definition is of that bad actor. So I think that's the real conversation, but it's where you have that conversation too. So the legislature is the right place to have that.
Mr. Sias, would you have fought to keep funds invested with Russia following the invasion of the Ukraine? And how about, like I said, investments with Saudi Arabian assets?
You know, Marshall, I think this is one of those areas where Dave and I, if you don't mind me calling you that, where Dave and I are actually very, very closely aligned. You know, my view is that divestment should be something that we do very, very rarely, because our primary responsibility is a rate of return for para members when we're talking about para, and for the taxpayers when we're talking about Colorado. You know, I voted for a divestment measure back in 2016 because certain criteria were met. That is, first of all, that it is done by the legislature, and second of all, that it is bipartisan and heavily bipartisan. I don't think partisan politics should be playing a role in
Which I voted for as well.
Yeah, and I don't think bipartisan politics should be playing a role. It was heavily bipartisan and targeting what I thought was a really, really serious issue.
Was this divestment from companies that are not pro-Israel?
Right.
I would put it differently.
A different way, but yes.
I would say that we're supporting a policy that was designed to get rid of Israel.
Right.
So we see some agreement there on the issue of divestment. We know that when you guys served together in the state legislature, you agreed on some issues, you disagreed on some other issues. And a lot of the talk around the treasurer's office just seems to be telling people to vote their party, which seems like an awful uninformed way to make a choice. If somebody's watching this debate, they're clearly interested in what you gentlemen have to say and where you disagree on issues. So, Mr. Sias, I would ask you this.
Did you say in the treasurer's office?
No, I'm saying talk about the race. There's a lot of just, you know, Democrats vote Democrat, Republicans vote Republican, that kind of thing. And if folks are here and they're spending their time, they want to hear from you directly. So,
sure.
Mr. Sias, you said that Coloradans are tired of single-party rule and what it's brought us economically.
Yeah.
What has he brought us economically as the state treasurer? Can you point to any actions that he's taken in office as treasurer that have negatively impacted the economy? Other than, I think what you said, hiring a couple staff members? Come on.
Listen, this is about, the reason this is an elected office is not because of the ministerial, very important, but ministerial tasks that the Treasurer's Department does. It is about leadership, and it's about how you're going to lead in trying to solve the major problems. And on those issues, I respect my opponent, but I think we have very, very different views. For example, you just heard us have very different views on whether or not taxpayers should be able to vote on tax increases and tax refunds.
Not a function of his office, though, just something you're talking about. Is there anything within the function of the office?
Part of the function of the office is using the bully pulpit of that. He talked about that when he ran in 2018, said he would use the bully pulpit, would work with members of the legislature on economic issues, which he has done. I will just do that in a different way that will provide balance in this state. He believes and has rubber stamped the policies that have come out of our legislature and our gubernatorial office, and that's fine.
No,
I will provide balance.
I want to follow the law.
I want to hear from you on this.
Yeah.
You know this man. You've had agreements. You've had disagreements. You also know how the office functions.
Absolutely.
What specifically would he do as treasurer that would hurt this state? What do you think that he would do?
Well, let's talk about what's happening with other Republican state treasurers around the country.
What would he do?
Well, I don't know if he's going to fall in line with the other Republican state treasurers.
Well, ask the question.
They are actually divesting from companies that are actually trying to deal with climate change and are saying they're only going to invest their state's money in fossil fuels. So my question to you is, will you fall in line? Will you follow the lead of West Virginia State Treasurer Riley Moore?
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly what he has done, but you have heard me.
You have
heard me respond to this question before, and I have said no. I'm not going to divest from either fossil fuels or divest from renewable energy. I'm going to do what is in the best interest of the para members when we're talking about para, and of the state when we're talking about the state. That is my fiduciary responsibility, right. and I'm going to follow it. And Dave, you've heard me respond to that and give that answer many times already.
Well, now the folks watching this debate have heard it. So my question be damned, you guys have jumped into the candidates ask each other questions portion, which is totally fine. Mr. Young, you just asked a question of Mr. Sias. So Mr. Sias, would you like to ask a direct question of Mr. Young?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, and we've covered some of this already, but I'll hit it quickly. So in 2019, the 2019 Dave Young was in support of Proposition CC, which would have gotten rid of our Tabor refunds, not just then, but forever. The 2022 Dave Young is now running ads saying, hey, please vote for me because I'm giving you $750. My question is about the 2023 Dave Young. If in fact you are reelected, Can the voters count on you not to try and take that money away again if that's back on the ballot?
I'm all about outcomes for our state. And right now, as I talked about, we have really poor funding for education, but it isn't just education. It's also infrastructure like water, affordable housing, mental health. We have every aspect of our state's budget is in great distress, every aspect of it. And as a result, people aren't getting the essential needs. You advocate for returning taxpayer Bill of Rights refunds to the most wealthy. I want to do it in a fair way. I also want to have a conversation about the outcomes that we want to have as a state and the revenues that we need to have in order to get that done. I don't think the wealthy are paying their fair share at this point, but we'll put that in front of the voters and see if they agree.
We're nearing closings. I want to kind of go fast through this question. You mentioned the Climber program earlier in this debate. It's loans for small businesses. They have to be paid back, unlike federal PPP loans.
Right.
As of your May 2022 report, 9 companies borrowed $2 million and only 3 new jobs were created as a result. How is that a successful use of a loan program?
Well, that number has actually increased. We're at about 248 jobs saved. And frankly, it was the Trump era PPP money that actually flooded the market. You know, no small business is going to take a loan, even if it's below market rate like we were offering. If they can actually get a forgivable loan, they don't even have to pay interest. They don't even have to pay the principal back as long as they follow the rules. And so we went back to the legislature. By the way, that bill, that was done by permission of the legislature. We had unanimous support of the state Senate, both very bipartisan, to run that program and stand it up. And then we discovered, because of the economic conditions that were changing, that the market forces its way away. So we went back to the legislature this last time. We did a deep dive with lenders, with small businesses, and actually retooled the program. We're about to stand that up again with better terms.
Mr. Sias, would you try to reform or end that program if you were treasurer?
I would take a very close look at it. I mean, the bottom line is that the current treasurer has been portraying that program as a success when in fact it cost the taxpayers a lot of money, over $11 million, to loan out to. That's not a good deal. And so the program has so far failed. And so I want to take a very close look at it and see if in fact it's the best use of the taxpayers' money going forward. I grew up in a small business and I am all about helping small business. The question is whether using another $250 million of taxpayer money is best served in that fashion.
It's not a $250 million of taxpayer dollars.
You have
It's a $250 million small business loan program, but actually 5 large contributing banks here in the state of Colorado agree that it's a good program and are actually putting in $200 million of their own capital in order to fund this program. So we have a lot of agreement on legislators and on bankers that this is a good program. We are retooling to try to make it work better.
Thank you both on that.
All right, this was the rip-roaring treasurer debate that we all expected. Each candidate will now make a 1-minute closing statement as determined by a coin toss. Mr. Sias, you can go first.
Well, thank you very much. You know, my wife Renee and I moved to Colorado 22 years ago because we wanted to raise our family and live and work in this great state. And we want that for our children as well as they grow older. But Colorado has become an incredibly expensive state under single-party rule. Right now, Colorado families are paying $11,000 a year more than they were at the beginning of 2021 just to maintain their standard of living. We need some balance, and I will restore that balance. And the choice in this race is pretty clear. My opponent, who I respect personally, thinks that the government should be able to take more of your hard-earned tax dollars from hardworking families so that the government can grow larger and spend it. I happen to believe that that money is yours, you should be able to keep more of it, and that the government should be more efficient and should actually be required to follow through on its promises. My name is Lang Sias. I'm asking for your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Kyle and Marshall, thank you so much for organizing this. I want to thank the viewers that are watching. You know, we've heard a lot of conversation about a variety of issues, but I want to remind the viewing public that the #1 job of the treasurer is to protect the taxpayers' dollars. And over the last 4 years, as I've led the Treasury, I've done a great job of doing that. Not one dime has been lost by the Treasury over the last 4 years, even through turbulent economic times. So I have a track record that proves that I can run the nuts and bolts of this office, and I'm very excited to do it. I've also been able to start a large and it's about to launch a retirement savings program called the Colorado Secure Savings Program that will actually allow people, 1 million people in the private sector, the opportunity to begin saving for retirement. Will save taxpayers $18 billion. So I am working very hard to protect taxpayers through the work that I do. As my opponent said, the ballots are in mail. If you haven't received it already, you may have. I am asking for your support and appreciate the time on the show.
Treasurer Dave Young, Lang Sias, thank you both for being here. This is the third in an unprecedented series of 6 debates that we are televising on 9 News this election year. Debates in Colorado's most closely watched congressional races, the U.S. Senate race, and all of the statewide races with the exception of governor. Democratic Governor Jared Polis agreed to debate here. His Republican challenger Heidi Ganahl declined. For the full schedule of debates and a link to this debate video so you can share it with friends or family, text the word debate to 303-871-1491. We'll send you that full debate schedule as well as the full video of tonight's debate. Our next debate is Friday, October 1st, in the race for Colorado's 7th Congressional District, which includes Jefferson County. That debate between Democratic State Representative Brittany Pedersen and Republican Eric Odlin will air as part of Next at 6 p.m. on 9 News on Friday. For the whole 9 News team, I'm Kyle Clark. Thanks for joining us.